Well, family, to start us off this morning, answer me this. Just how physically strong are you? How buff are you? How strong are you? And I'm not talking emotionally. I'm talking literally physically. How physically strong? And I'm not saying how strong do you think you are? All of us are Schwarzeneggers, aren't we? All of us, it's so funny. Sometimes I watch the video and I go, that's me? It's true. The video puts on 10 pounds, if not 40 on that as I'm looking at it. Not quite what I was in my 20s when I was doing the weightlifting, but how strong are you? Literally. How literally strong are you? It's interesting that as you look at the animal world that God has made, not always is sight, how an animal looks, a good indication of its strength. So again, I'm not asking how strong do you look. I'm asking how strong are you? As you look to the animal kingdom, you see that sometimes appearances are not always a good indication of strength. Now, no doubt, the larger animals, like an African elephant, that can supposedly lift 700 pounds with its trunk alone, 700 pounds, 4 or 5 of us, depending who you are, one of me on that. But an African elephant can be able to lift 700 pounds with its trunk. Or the saltwater crocodile, which can crush in its jaws with one chomp the solid skull of a cow. In one chomp, boom, it's done. Isn't that nice, Joanne? I see Joanne's face. Yeah, I agree. She's going to punch me afterwards. But it's true. That's the power of it. Or, I'll give you one more. The adult silverback gorilla. Do you ever see these big gorillas? I love kill for the pecs on these gorillas. But an adult silverback gorilla, which is astonishingly strong, at least 6 times and as much as 20 times stronger than that of a human. Stronger than a human. 6 to 20 times stronger than you and I. If we were going to have an arm wrestle with a silverback gorilla, it would take at least 6 of us men to bring his arm down. As much as 20 of us to bring his arm down. That's how strong they are. These animals are. However, no doubt these larger animals do indeed epitomize what strength is. However, although when it comes to strength, size can mean a lot. To be honest, interestingly, as you take a look at the animal world, some of the strongest animals, relatively speaking, pound for pound, are not the big ones, but the small ones. And by small, I mean small. I mean, we've all heard of it, the ant. The ant can supposedly lift not 6 to 20 times its weight, like the gorilla, not 6 to 20 times stronger than a human, but an ant, a leafcutter ant, can lift 10 to 50 times, 10 to 50 times its own weight, and can carry that weight for a long distance on that. A leafcutter ant, 10 to 50 times. How many of you are equivalent to that? Shame on you. You're not even as strong as an ant. Not even as strong as isn't that heavy to be able to say though? 10 to 50 times its own weight it can lift. Or let me get a little bigger. A certain beetle, a half-inch long beetle, a dung beetle, it's called, can actually move not 50 times its own weight, not 100 times its own weight, but 200 times its own weight. And researchers have even documented one of these beetles as actually pushing a ball that was 1,141 times, they've done this, 1,141 times its own weight on that. If you put that into perspective, relatively speaking, what that means is a 150-pound man or woman, 150-pound man or woman, if they had the strength of a dung beetle, could be able to move between 30,000 to 171,000. 30,000 to 171,000 pounds worth of weight. That's 15 to 85 tons. 15 to 85 tons on that. It's amazing the strength that some of these little guys can actually have. And you know, when I saw that thing online concerning the dung beetle, I went on a number of references because it just seemed like it was too much. A dung beetle is generally 0.75 ounces. According to this, it could move a 53-pound ball. And some were saying flags up, because it depends on the friction. It depends on the friction, on a slope. Anyone can on that. But nonetheless, it's been proven at least 200 pounds, at least 30,000 pounds you should be able to move if you're as strong as a dung beetle. You know, it's truly, truly amazing, even mind-blowing how Creator God has designed and so perfectly created the wonders of His creation. And through it, as we just saw, He Himself teaches us that size doesn't always matter. Size doesn't always matter. Appearances don't always tell the whole story. If you want a reputation for your strength, don't aim at being as strong as an ox. Because an ox, although it's strong, can only lift 1 to 1.5 times its own weight. That's all that an ox can lift. And that's a lot, but nonetheless, strong as an ox. Forget strong as an ox. Strong as a dung beetle. Strong as an ant on that can lift so much more. That is impressive. I want to be strong as a beetle on that. Doesn't it? It sounds funny. But nonetheless, that's the truth of it. Now, the reason I say all that at the beginning here is not to necessarily for you to go to the gym and tear down all your motivational posters and put up pictures of dung beetle and leafcutter ants on that. I'm not saying it for that purpose. The reason I mention that is to say this. I really, truly believe that what I've been trying to communicate the last month and a half in the messages, for those of you who are here for the first time, I'll give a synopsis of it, but what I've been trying to communicate in the last month and a half in our Sunday messages, I think has way more substance and strength for our Christian confidence, our Christian encouragement, our Christian living than what we might first think. Although first appearances come off as me just rattling off interesting fact after interesting fact about the undeniable truth of historical prophecy. Remember, that's what we're talking about. Historical prophecy pointing ahead to and being meticulously fulfilled to the letter in the coming of the person of who Jesus is. Prophecy points ahead. We saw it all through the Christmas season. How many prophecies speak of the coming of Jesus, and so meticulously as well. Although all of it at first glance might just come off as quote-unquote neat tidbits, to talk about and digest on a Sunday morning. Let me tell you though, if we could truly come to grips with and come to affirm the worth of understanding that hundreds of years before Jesus is born, close to 400 messianic prophecies. Close to 400 messianic prophecies are recorded in the Old Testament, which all find their fulfillment in one person. In one person. Hundreds of years before the event, they are recorded and find their fulfillment in one person, the man Jesus. If we could wrap our hearts around the mind-blowing improbability of this actually happening by chance, that all these prophecies could point to one man. If we could wrap our heads around that, then let me tell you, we would know in this fact alone the strength, not of an ox, not of an elephant, but we would know the strength of a beetle living inside of us for our living. If we could understand, if we could not just put it as facts in our head, but if we could hit on it strong and say, if in fact all these prophecies point ahead to who Jesus is, there's encouragement and strength for me in that. Why? Because this truth of Jesus, hear me, this truth of Jesus is an undeniable fact that just can't be dismissed, ignored, or conveniently explained away by the doubters and the naysayers. And that's what happens so often. People don't look at the facts and just shove Jesus off without knowing the facts of the situation. Before Jesus can ever be honestly and even rationally sidestepped, cynics first must, if they're going to be honest with life, they first must explain how history itself could so accurately and so powerfully point ahead to the person, the coming, the life, the ministry, the death, the resurrection of who Jesus is. As we've already seen, and this is the synopsis, so ready guys, really quick. As we've already seen, how can his genealogy, his family tree, have been spelled out so perfectly hundreds, even thousands of years before he comes on the scene? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David, all of them, the family tree of Jesus. And yet that is what is spelled out before Jesus comes on the scene. How can the town of his birth be recorded 700 years before he's actually born? Think about it. Try to go ahead to 2718. Tell me what major leader will be born. A certain major leader, where will they be born in 2718? It's impossible. Why? Because there are towns and cities that are in existence right now that won't be there in 2718. There are towns that aren't here now that will be then on that. So how could Micah so beautifully, 700 years before Jesus comes on the scene, say Bethlehem would be the town that this Messiah would be born in? How can the very time of his coming, remember we looked at that, how can the very time of his coming be so accurately predicted before it happens? The exact generation prophesied 500 years before by the prophet Haggai. The exact generation when the second temple would still be standing, that's when the Messiah would come. And Daniel, 600 years beforehand, even says to the very day when Jesus would come. We saw even more. How can the title given Jesus at his birth? Remember, what was the title given Jesus? Not Jesus, but there was a title given to Jesus by the angel to Joseph. What was that title? Do you remember what that title was? Emmanuel, that's it. Emmanuel, meaning God with us, exactly. How could that title be prophesied 700 years before the fact by Isaiah? Isaiah says, he will be called Emmanuel. 700 years before he's born. And how can, as we saw most recently, how can the salvation that he would bring this dark world be spelled out so flawlessly as Isaiah in the Old Testament prophesies, again, some 700 years before the event, and as Zechariah in the New Testament affirms over Jesus? How can his salvation be spelled out so flawlessly that it wouldn't just be a salvation for the Jews, it would be a salvation for the Gentiles? Let me tell you, 700 years before Jesus comes on, as you take a look at the Jewish nation, they weren't thinking good things for the Gentiles. Ask Jonah. Jonah wanted the town of Nineveh to be destroyed by God. Because why? Not only were they barbaric people, but nonetheless, they were Gentiles. And Gentiles deserve nothing but the wrath of God. And yet here's Isaiah in the same context saying that the Messiah would come that would provide salvation. Yes, for the Jews, obviously. That makes sense. But not just for the Jews, for the Gentiles. Indeed, so that his salvation would be seen to the ends of the earth, Isaiah says. Amazing on that. I mean, Isaiah even prophesies, again, 700 years before the fact, that rulers would travel with their camels to see him and would bow before him and worship him and give him gifts of gold and incense. That's what Isaiah says. Rulers would come and give him gifts of gold and incense. Does that strike a familiar ring in your ear? Who else was brought gifts of gold, myrrh as well, and incense? Jesus himself. And yet all of it points to who Christ is. How can all of this and so much more of Jesus' life be so easily explained away? How do you explain it away? It's because you don't deal with it. It's because you want to just shove it under a rug. If there is nothing of the supernatural in and behind the person and life of Jesus, then explain to me from a purely natural, rational, worldly, even scientific standpoint how all of these prophecies could so meticulously be fulfilled in this one man we know as Jesus. Apart from God, apart from God's involvement, the very Lord of space and time, not Doctor Who, God himself, the very Lord of space and time, without him acting in the midst of it, to be able to bring about, Jesus coming on that. It is unexplainable. It is categorically unexplainable how all of this could have happened. Now, as I mentioned in a message a few weeks back, ignorantly arrogant individuals would attempt to get around it. And I say ignorantly arrogant because they are ignorant concerning the facts. And they're arrogant because they want to pull one up on who God is. So I say that. I say that lovingly because, I guess I don't. But nonetheless, I just, get with the truth of the matter. Ignorantly arrogant or arrogantly ignorant individuals would attempt to get around it by arguing that all those compelling prophecies were not written before, but after the events of Jesus' life, sometime probably in the 1st or 2nd century AD. So push comes to shove, they're not mind-blowing prophecy, but simple history recorded fallaciously, even deceptively, as prophecy. That's what some people have done. I love the fact they've come about with this excuse as well. Why? Because they recognize how powerful the fact is that so many prophecies point to who Jesus is. So they've got to come up with an excuse. So what they say is that it wasn't prophecy written hundreds of years beforehand. It was history. It was someone in the 1st, 2nd century AD that was just a Jesus freak and just wanted to establish some of the things that Jesus was saying. So they wrote history as if it was prophecy, deceptively, fallaciously. That's what they say. Trouble is, remember, a couple of weeks ago, as I explained, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls thoroughly and categorically, once and for all, kiboshed that argument. Because in those scrolls, cold, hard, mundane, scientific analysis has firmly and forever established the incontrovertible fact. Hear all the adjectives that I'm using in this, because you gotta hear this, people. We gotta hear this, because there's the strength of a beetle in this for us. Doesn't that sound weird? I want to say the strength of an ox, but the strength of a beetle in this for us. It has forever established the incontrovertible fact that all these Old Testament prophecies of Jesus were there, copied out on parchment, at the very least 100 to 200 years before Jesus was even born. You don't need faith. You don't need faith. Fact dictates that when these scrolls were dated, they were dated between 100 to 200 years before Jesus even comes on the scene. That a group, that the Qumran community, were looking over these documents. And what makes these documents so special is every Old Testament book is recorded in these, except Esther. Every Old Testament book is there. And if every Old Testament book is there, all of the prophecies about Jesus are also there. So you can't even say, you can't even You can't even say they were recorded after the fact, because 100 to 200 years before Jesus comes around, I mean, we believe, obviously, we take God at his word and trust that Micah wrote the birthplace of Jesus would be Bethlehem 700 years before he comes, because that's what Micah was the prophet at the time. At the time when the Assyrian army came in and took the northern kingdom away, he was speaking to Judah, but nonetheless, we believe that. We take it at face value, which we should. Because hear me on this. The Bible, although it's a spiritual book, is one of the best attested historical books as well. Historians, archaeologists, not Christian ones, but historians and archaeologists have even said so often that if they wanted to know something, they'd go to the Old Testament, even to the New Testament. Some would say Luke was the greatest historian that ever lived, because he was so meticulous in his giving us what he did. So the fact is, rightly so, we take for granted what Scripture says, that it wasn't written just 100 to 200 years beforehand, but it was written 500 to 700 years, depending on the prophecy. We take it for granted. But if you're not going to take that, you can't deny there were manuscripts written with these prophecies in them that were in existence 100 to 200 years before Jesus comes on. And if you think that's nothing, try to think of a great world leader that will be born 200 years from now and tell me where it is he'll be born. It's just as problematic. Just as problematic. All of these prophecies point to Jesus and are fulfilled in who Jesus is. If you don't believe what Scripture says 500 to 700 years beforehand, you gotta admit, you have to, unless you've got a screw loose, unless you're not dealing with the facts as to what. I know I'm being heavy on that, but let me tell you, there are people teaching that the Bible, that Jesus is not true. Before you can honestly admit he isn't, you first have to tell me how close to 400 prophecies point in some miraculous, oh no, you can't use the word miraculous because you don't believe in God. Then you got to tell me how mundanely, how scientifically this could be made true. So with all that said, like I mentioned earlier, if our mind and soul can fully appreciate and affirm and truly grasp and validate this mind-blowing truth of close to 400 prophecies of Jesus written out hundreds of years before he came, if we could truly settle into the undeniably supernatural element of these prophecies, let me tell you, just in that fact alone, there'd be more sustaining strength for our Christian confidence and our Christian living than we could ever. Let me tell you, like Shell said this morning, emotion is a difficult thing. And it can make you second guess everything you've held to. You go through a difficult time in life. Some of you are right now. Has Satan ever put the doubt in your head? Are you right? Do you really think if you were right, this would be your life? Obviously, he hasn't read the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what I gotta say. This is fact. We're not talking faith any longer. Before you dismiss who Jesus is, you first have to tell me how close to 400 prophecies can point to this one man and be fulfilled. And remember, we did that thing of just 8 prophecies being fulfilled in one man would be the same as how many silver dollars draped 30 meters all over this earth, and you reaching in and choosing one of them, and it's the marked silver dollar. It's impossible, and that's just for 8. And that was scientifically done and admitted, affirmed by those in right places. Only 8. How about 400? It boggles the mind as to the improbability that this could happen by chance. It can't. It just can't happen by chance that all these. So then, we have to back up and say, if that's the case, then that means the supernatural had to be involved. in the life of this man that was coming. The supernatural had to be involved. And if we come to grips with that, let me tell you, there's the strength, like I said, the strength of an ant, the strength of a beetle living for us to be had. Because in the midst of our emotion, we can't deny this. We can't. It's just fact. Shell and I, as you know, have been going through some difficult times ourselves, a little, not between us, but because of the church, because of Coda dying two weeks ago, and us praying at length for it. And I tell you, there have been times in the last few weeks where we have just thrown our hands up and say, is it worth it? You never heard me, I'll edit that on that. But it's the truth, isn't it? I'm a pastor, I've been a preacher of the word from day one, but emotion is hard, especially for the emotional person that I am. I am an emotional person, don't want to be anything but. I love it, I'm so thankful. But like I said last week, I have this incessant thing of truth inside of me that when I feel like I'm at burnout because of different things I can't explain, emotionally I want to give up, I want to throw everything through the window. Fact is, I just can't. I just can't. Why? Because history itself records facts. Jesus is not something made up. You have to explain before you dismiss him. You have to explain how 400 plus, or almost 400 prophecies can point to this one man. I know I'm going over it and over it on that. I just want to get in your head so that this week when Satan comes to lie to you, what you're believing maybe is not the case. You know, there are other religions, or maybe if other religions, you know, that's never my tempt to go to another religion because, you know, the tempt is just to let God go or be less than what God wants me to be. Be less. I'm a passionate person. I think you guys know that by now. I'm a passionate person. As we stood out on Niagara Street, how often did we stand there still and pray that God would move? Did we see the fruit that we wanted? Probably not. But nonetheless, we still knew somehow behind the scenes that's what God wanted us to do. I'll never forget that cop stopping one night and saying, you know what, since you guys started, we have seen a downturn in crime in the city of Welland. I'm not making that up. I'm not making that up. That was such an encouragement to our hearts. Listen to me, God is real. And the fact is, we have got to, in the midst of the downtime that I'm in right now, I've got to come face to face with, there is no giving this up. No giving this up. If I want to walk in truth and recognize if you choose to not walk in truth, truth by its very nature means it will one day come back to bite you. You either walk in truth or truth ends up biting you. You can't remove yourself from it. You can't walk off of a cliff and because you truly believe, you don't believe in the truth of gravity, that you're going to keep walking. You are not Wile E. Coyote. You will fall the moment your foot leaves the cliff. That's the same with truth. You cannot give truth up if you don't want to be bit by it. So that's why I'm just saying, there is so much strength for us in this. And I'm still debating whether I should go into the next series that I wanted, or whether I should give you guys, I'm okay either way. But I'd like to show you a few other prophecies with regards to Jesus' life, with regards to Jesus' death. Read Isaiah 53. It sounds like it's written after the fact. Psalm 22, my hands and feet are pierced. 1,000 years before Jesus dies. Tell me how. I'd love to do that. Maybe I will. Unless there's, I wouldn't be upset if you guys said no. Just move on. But if there's someone, come up to me and just let me know. I'm looking for the Spirit to move me. So, and He might do it through you. So there is strength for us, beetle strength and strength for us in the midst of this to be able to stay put, in spite of the emotions that want us to shove everything through. But this is what I want to say. If you think that you really don't need the validation of prophecy, Because you already firmly and forever believe in the truth of Jesus. Anyone there? I believe in who Jesus is. By faith, I've taken that. So I don't need the validation of prophecy to be able to say that. Hear me on this. That was the encouraging portion of the message. This is the difficult portion of the message. Understand, these very prophecies that validate, and put your thinking cap on for this, these very prophecies that validate the person and life of Jesus also validate, hear me, his words, his teaching. If the supernatural was undeniably involved in the life of Jesus, that means logically then what Jesus said is also supernaturally affirmed. If God was involved in giving us prophecy after prophecy after prophecy, we got to say it's a God thing. You can't explain it away naturally. So you've got to say God was involved hundreds, thousands of years before Jesus comes on the scene to bring Jesus here. Now, once Jesus is here and we acknowledge that God was involved, and by the way, I know Jesus is God, but whenever Jesus spoke to the Father, he addressed him as we would address God as well. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, three in one. But that's the way Jesus always did. The Father brought him to earth on that. The Father. And we have got to say that if, in fact, the Father, if God was involved in the prophecies that brought Jesus to this earth, doesn't it make sense then that God was also involved in the words that Jesus said? Be careful about saying too quick of a yes, because this is difficult. It's good for me as well. God himself was speaking in and through the very words of Jesus. So that said, if you think you can dismiss or ignore the authority of Jesus' words in the Gospels, yes, the red letters, Jesus' words, but how many times have I said it? All of Scripture, seen from Genesis through to Revelation, according to Colossians 3:16, how many times have I said it? According to Colossians 3:16, it is all the Word of Christ. All of it, from Genesis through to Revelation. Not just the red letters. Don't like the fact that some letters are in red and others aren't. As if the black ones never had as much authority as the red ones. It's all Jesus' words. All of it, from Genesis through to Revelation. It's all the Word of Christ. If you think you can sidestep any of what it is Jesus commands us in His Word, then to be practically honest, in keeping with what we're looking at, you really don't fully then affirm the supernatural element of Messianic prophecy. You don't. If you can choose to disregard what it is that Jesus tells you to do, then do you know what you're disregarding? The very one that God himself pointed to for hundreds, even thousands of years. You're disregarding. You're maybe not the person of Jesus, but the very words of Jesus. The supernatural element of Messianic prophecy. Because if prophecy pushes us to affirm God's personal involvement in the person and life of Christ, it must also logically affirm God's personal involvement in and ratification of the very words of who Jesus is. I wanted to read that because I want you to hear this on this. If we make the almost snubbish kind of acclaim that yes, Jesus is the person that God for hundreds, thousands of years pointed ahead to, there's a supernatural element, and yet we never open His words. And yet, when His words are open, we make excuse after excuse to either sideline it or ignore it. Then there's something wrong with our understanding of the supernatural element that's within prophecy. We really don't believe it. If push comes to shove. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? If the person in the life of Jesus is being affirmed by God through prophecy, then logically so must the authority of Jesus in His words and in His teaching. If we affirm that God affirmed the life and if God affirmed the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, we also have to affirm the authority of Jesus, that God is working in and through this land, so this man. So that means if we honestly hold to the mind-blowing supernatural element of prophecy in Jesus' life, not only will it call us to personally validate and receive his person and life into our own lives. I mean, you believe it to a point, don't you? Because the majority of you have given your heart. There's come a time in your life where you've given Jesus your heart and life, so you believed it. You believed that he was the one that was looking forward, because you couldn't rationalize how he couldn't be. Maybe you never thought of it that way, but nonetheless, that's the fact. You came to grips one day with recognizing Jesus is the person. Lord, I can't do life on my own. I need you to be able to show the way. And because you are the truth, I am going to give my heart and life over to you. I'm going to trust, thank you, Henry, for putting that cross up there at the front. I am going to trust what it is that Jesus did for us. Did for me there at the cross. There's come a time where you've received that. You've agreed to the supernatural element of prophecy in the life and ministry of Jesus. But it's as well a call for us to humble ourselves before and to promptly, with reverence and fear, trust and obey his words, his teaching, his commands, his promises. If you truly believe in the true and verified supernatural element of messianic prophecy, then you can't help but give yourself to the whole of who Jesus is. You can't help but. God's been pointing to him for thousands of years. If that's true, then we got to make sure our lives line up with that. It's a fact. If you take the Dead Sea Scrolls in, you don't even need faith unless you explain to me, do I say it again, how 400 prophecies can point to one man and be fulfilled in one man. If in fact we truly believe that there is something supernatural going on, something beyond that can't be explained with human reasoning, then the fact is we take Jesus for everything that he is. Or else we explain away who Jesus is. Good luck. Good luck. Don't believe in luck, but nonetheless, good luck, because you do, obviously, if that's what you're doing. You know, that's the case. We have to take Jesus for who he is. That means his life. That means his death. That means his resurrection. And hear this, that means his very words as well. How many of you, if I were to point at you, could say, this past week, I got into the Word. I opened the Word and I read something from it. And could you tell me where? If I did, no, don't worry, I won't do that. Maybe next week I will. Maybe next week I will. Why? Because if in fact you affirm that God was pointing ahead to who Jesus is, you've got to take seriously his words as well. Ready? We're at the end. So we're not at the end, though, because I'm going to give you a number of scriptures here that I want you to hear what's being said in these. I think it is so important. I'm going to give them in clumps here. We've got a few of them, so we'll get through them really quick. But I want you to hear from Scripture. And for those of you who are new, we open the Word and you read to us. Give me 15 minutes here, and we'll close out on that. Luke 24, 25 to 27. Luke 24, Mike. Luke 24, 25 to 27. I'll say it again because that's a confusing thing. Luke 24, chapter 24, verses 25 to 27. John 12, 47 to 50. Like John 12, 47 to 50. Deuteronomy 18, 15 to 19. Deuteronomy 18, 15 to 19. That's Deuteronomy 18, 15 to 19. Should I say it again? Deuteronomy 18, 15 to 19. Two more. John 17, 8. Clive, did you want to? John 17, 8. Thanks, brother. John chapter 17, verse 8. And finally, John 14, 24. John 14, 24. John 14, 24. Listen to these verses. I'll explain them as we go. And Luke 24, 25 to 27. Jesus has just risen from the dead. His disciples don't yet know it. I'm not just talking about the 12, I'm talking on the fringe. I've mentioned this before. What an incredible thing. I would have loved to have been walking on the road to Emmaus with those two disciples. Suddenly, Jesus comes alongside of them and recognizes they're depressed. Why? Because Jesus died. Because Jesus died. Jesus, from a human standpoint, he's hitting his head on the wall. Don't you know what was supposed to happen? And you know what happens in these. Listen, Luke 24, 25 to 27. Mike, read that.
And he said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things, then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself.
Wouldn't have you loved to have been there? Jesus, going through the entire Old Testament, we know it as the Old Testament, the New Testament wasn't there at the time, all of Scripture, and saying where he was in it. All the prophecies that pointed to. Why? Because these disciples were beginning to doubt the validity of the person of who Jesus is. So Jesus validated his own person by showing them all the prophecies. All the prophecies. All the prophecies point to the fact of who Christ is. And if you deny who Jesus is, you deny all of the prophetic nature of it all. When Jesus wanted to establish himself, he showed all the prophecies that concern him. But not only is Jesus established through the prophecies with regards to his life, his death, his resurrection, because that's what he was talking to the two on the road to Emmaus. He's dead. He's dead. Well, didn't you read in the Psalms and in Isaiah where I'm going to live again? I may die, but I'm going to live again. And I would have loved for Jesus. You think I'm passionate? Maybe he spoke calmly. Maybe he did, I guess. But nonetheless, he was just showing all throughout the Old Testament. This is where he was. But if in fact it points to the person of who Jesus is, it's also the words. If in fact God was bringing to fulfillment the person of Jesus, don't you think when Jesus comes on the scene, his very words would be God's very words? Listen to John 12, 47 to 50, right? John 12, 47 to 50. Listen to Jesus' own words concerning his own words. Listen, John 12, 47 to 50.
As for the person who hears my words, but does not keep them, I do not judge him. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. There is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. That very word which I spoke will condemn him at the last day. For I did not speak of my own accord, but the Father who sent me commanded me what to say and how to say it. I know that his command leads to eternal life. So whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say.
Now, doesn't that make sense? If the supernatural was pointing ahead to Jesus all this time to bring him here, doesn't it make sense that the supernatural, who Jesus is, I get it, I understand all the... wouldn't it make sense that the supernatural, God himself, would flood through Jesus, even in his very words? That's what Jesus is saying. When I speak, God the Father is speaking. When I speak, interestingly, I hope you caught it. If you try to skirt around truth, it will come back to bite you. Not Jesus biting you, but his words biting you one day. I'm giving you the truth. You choose to run from the truth, enjoy. You've got 70, 80 years to run from the truth. And one day you will stand before me, and the truth will bite you and devastate you if you choose to off who Jesus is. We know that with regards to Christians. As Christians, but it's with regards to the entirety of his word. Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 19. It's interesting. God was so consumed with making sure that even the very words of Jesus would be his own words. Here's a prophecy spoken of. We haven't looked at this one, but this is Moses. Moses is talking to the people and he's saying, God's going to raise up a Messiah. He specifically says a prophet. Who, like me, Moses says, God will one day raise up a prophet like me, 1,500 years before Jesus comes on the scene. And what he says will be from God's own mouth. Listen to Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 19.
The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers.
By the way, sorry, Nance, you can start again. This is Moses talking to the people. Moses himself is talking to people. Listen as Nance. Start it again, Nance.
The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him. For this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, "Let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire anymore, or we will die." The Lord said to me, "What they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like from you." I will raise for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. If anyone does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account.
The Messiah was noted as the prophet that would come, the prophet like Moses. And you notice what God is saying. Not only do I affirm his coming life, death, resurrection, I affirm his very words. And understand, if you don't listen to the words of this coming prophet, this Messiah, 1,500 years before the fact, if you don't listen to these words, I'm going to call you to account for all of it. You know, sometimes we think God is love. He is love. He's incredible love. But if you off him, it's not him that's going to off you. You've made the choice. I can do life on my own. I don't have to listen to who he is. So instead, he says, then if you don't choose to listen to my words, one day they will come back to bite you in a devastating, devastating way. Because my own words will flood through this coming one, this coming prophet. Isn't it interesting? When Jesus comes on the scene, listen to what he says in John 17:8 and John 14:24. Read them one after the other. John 17:8 and John 14:24. It was Clive and who else? And Job. John 17:8 and John 14:24. If, in fact, the Messiah was going to be one that would not only live and die and rise again, but that when he spoke, the very words of God would be spoken. It's interesting that when Jesus comes on the scene and talks about his own words, we already saw it in John 12, but hear this twice. I'm hitting you 3 times with this, because I want you to see, when Jesus is speaking, it's not just a man speaking, it's God's own words. Why? Because he's the prophet, like Moses, that was to come. And if you choose to shove it off, God will call you to account for his very words. Listen to what Jesus says in John 17:8. Clive?
For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me.
I gave them the words, Jesus said, you gave me. John 17 is his high priestly prayer. He's looking up at the Father and he said, Lord, the disciples that you gave me, I gave them your words, not my words. Isn't that what the prophet would do? Give the words of God. John 14:24.
He who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me.
I love that. I love that. You know, in some sense, God the Son and God the Father and God the Spirit are so one in some way. That's why it's so difficult to try to figure out the Trinity on that. You know, it's 3 in 1. Yeah, it's an apple. It's like, we use all these crazy things to be able to, but in some way, as Jesus is speaking, as the Son, the person of the Son is speaking, the person of the Father, he's using the words of the person of the Father. It's God's own words flooding through him, and that's why they are so heavy. And that is why, hear me on this, if we affirm that prophecy, the supernatural element of prophecy that points ahead to the life, the death, the resurrection of who Christ is, we also have to affirm the authority of Jesus when he comes. Do you? Do you truly believe in the fact that that the supernatural was working for hundreds, even thousands of years before Jesus comes on the scene? Do you firmly believe that, so that when he comes, you believe not only that he is the one, but you listen to his words as well? If you were to listen to his words. I just picked out a few of these from the book of John. Get the book of John. We're going to close off with a few of these scriptures, because I'm going to make it uncomfortable here. Here's the fact. I'm going to give you a few things of what Jesus says. Doesn't it make sense? If I'm talking about the authority of Jesus as our litmus test as to how much we truly believe in the supernatural element of prophecy, then I've got to throw out a few of the things that Jesus says and ask you, do you truly believe them? First of all, I'm just going to give these out. First one to get it, we're going to sword drill. Raise your swords on your mark and set, go. Ready? John 14:6. You know it. If you know it, you can even say it. John chapter 14, verse 6.
Jesus answered.
All together now.
Oh, I love the stereo on that. Someone, one of you.
Go ahead. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You know, in today's culture, Jesus is kind and meek and gentle. Jesus. Do you know what he says? He looks at the people and he says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to God the Father except through me. That's the gentle and meek Jesus. You can't get to God apart from Jesus. You can't get to God through Allah. You can't get to God through Buddha. You can't get to God through being good. The only way you can get to God is to believe the person of who Jesus is and what he did for you there at the cross. He died for you in your place. And he took the sin of you on yourself. And you in humility before him confess that to be the case. How many believe John 14:6 and know that you know it's the truth, and you can affirm that in your heart? And most of us would say yes to that because we're in a church service on Sunday morning. And the reason I say that is not because we're just in a church service, but most of us are Christians. We've already done that. I did that at 5 years of age. I gave my heart and life over to who Jesus was. There's no hoops to jump through. It's simply trusting the word. I know it to be the case. And in that, I affirm the supernatural element of prophecy. Because not only do I affirm who Jesus is, I affirm his words. He says he's the way. He says he's the truth. He says he's the life. He says no one comes to the Father except through him. So I believe it. So I believe it. I trust it. Whether or not it feels good or not. Tell some of our Middle East friends as Christians who have a gun to their head. Do you believe that? I see true belief sometimes in that. When push comes to shove, they will believe that. But it goes further than that. Okay, let's get. I've just got a few more. I want to give you John 16:24. First one to get it. All in the book of John. John 16:24. If you believe, if you can say yes and amen to John 14:6. Do you believe this as well, to the same extent? John 16:24.
Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask, and you will receive, and your joy will be complete.
Jesus said, ask. Ask. Ask me. How's your prayer life? Not bad. Jesus says, ask. Hear me on this. In the last couple of weeks, I've hit a brick wall with regards to my prayer life. For a year, over 1,000 times, I took Coda's tumorous in my hand and prayed God's mercy over it. Mercy, Lord, just mercy. We don't have kids, I get it. So it's our kid, Coda. She dies. After 1,000 prayers! 1,000 prayers! Like I said last week, in my message, part of me just wants, off him. You're not going to listen to me. Forgive me. for a second, but it's the truth. See, here's the problem. The moment I stop my prayer life, I negate the fact of the supernatural element of prophecy in Jesus. Why? Because Jesus himself said, ask. And the word there in the Greek is ask and keep asking. Don't give up. And you will receive so that your joy will be full. My joy is gone. But I am not in the midst of emotion to be able to say, I'm not praying anymore. Not praying anymore. Not praying anymore. Why? Because truth dictates, in spite of my emotions, that I must continue praying and trust and believe. If in fact I truly do believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the prophet, the one speaking about God. So tell me, how's your prayer life? Don't tell me it's good. If you don't spend time in prayer, if you make every excuse you can when I tell you to come out on a Wednesday night for prayer. Ooh, now I'm stepping on toes. But you know, it's the truth. We need prayer. I care so much what you guys have gone through. I get it. Life can suck at times. Life can be difficult at times. But it does not legitimize your prayerlessness. Because prayer is truth. And if you run from those words of Jesus, one day God will call you to account. You'll still be going to heaven. Why? Because you've given your heart and life over to who Jesus is. Thank the Lord. But you will lose reward. You will, and you will feel the angst of it as you stand before the bema seat of Christ, before going into heaven. God says, pray. You must pray. John 13, 34 and 35. Quick, John 13, 34 and 35. First one to get it. John 13, 34 and 35. You're not going to like me after this one. So John 13, 34 and 35.
A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another.
How's your love for others? But you don't know what they did to me. You don't know what happened. And let me tell you, I as a pastor have heard every flippant excuse. And they're real excuses. I get it. Some of you have been hurt by others. The trouble is, truth still dictates we love them. If in fact we truly believe that Jesus is the Messiah, if we truly believe in the supernatural element of prophecy that points ahead, that confirms the authority of Jesus' words, if the authority of Jesus' words says, love your enemies, we are to push through the angst inside of ourselves and in some way be able to say, but you don't understand. You don't understand, Shane. You just don't. I get it. Especially what happened to us 2 years ago. I get it. I understand. Doesn't legitimize it. It doesn't. We are still to love. We are still to love. And there are times where we have to grow in this and mature in it. I get it. Some things won't be overnight. I hope I'm not just saying that to make excuse. Because the fact is, if it's truth, we have to do it. We have to love, even as Jesus loved us. Oh, how did Jesus love you? Because you're just such a wonderful person, right? No, Jesus died for you. At your worst, at my worst, he found me. At my worst, he died. That was Leighton and I singing it. But we got to hear that. At our worst, he loved us. And we have got to choose to be able to push it. There's no emotions that speak. Now, in case you think it's just hard-hitting, let me close off with two encouragements. And to be blunt honest, with these two, I think sometimes, and then we're done, don't worry. I think sometimes it's easier to be able to hear a command than it is to be able to hear Jesus say, trust me. Understand, the trust issue is still a command inside of us. We still have to trust him to this end, no matter what our emotions say, because this is truth. Let me give you two of those trust things that Jesus says. Again, in the book of John, John 10, 27 to 29. Someone read. This will be an encouragement, but sometimes in the midst of our distressing times, we really don't believe this. John 10, 27 to 29. Second to last thing.
My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. I give them eternal life and they shall never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand.
Heavy words. I mean, adamant words, Jesus says. When you give your heart and life over to who Christ is, what happens is you get placed inside Jesus' hand. And in some way, I guess there's a spiritual understanding of this, but nonetheless, God the Father's hand is wrapped around God the Son's hand, and you're in the middle of it. Who do you think can get at you? Who do you think can pull you from his hand? No one can. Stop doubting your salvation. Stop thinking God's a million miles away. He can't be a million miles away. You're in his hand. He can't be. But you know what's happened to me this last month. It feels like, yes, it feels like, but like Shelley so eloquently said at the beginning, fact over feeling. And the fact is, if in fact you've given Jesus your heart and life and trusted what he did there at Calvary, you are in his hand. Nothing will pull you away from his hand. You are his. Even if you don't want to go to heaven, you're going there. I don't mean to say it like that, but you know what I'm saying. You are secure. You are secure. And let me tell you, you can come to a low point where you feel almost legitimate in offing God. Oh, you don't want? You don't want to help me? Then I'm just going to walk away. And God says, that's what I said last week. You don't want to help me? God looks at you and says, you're going to do, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to walk away? You're only hurting yourself. And the fact is, if we know what Scripture says, your salvation is secure. So stop doubting it. Stop doubting it. In fact, with this we close off. John 14:27. I know like this. I don't like this. John 14:27. It's a beautiful, beautiful promise. John 14:27. Someone read it.
Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid.
The word is, don't allow your mind to be thrown into confusion. Don't be distressed. I've given you peace. Learn to rest in that. Sometimes, like I said, it's easier to obey a command than it is to trust it. There's peace for you. You don't have to worry. Where do I come forward? That's just my natural emotional makeup. I love worrying. I don't love worrying, but it looks like I love worrying because that's what I always do. God says, trust me. You are in my hand. My peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give. Let not your heart be troubled. Choose to be able to rest in. You're not going to understand everything, but understand, if in fact the supernatural element was involved in Jesus getting here, his life, his ministry, his death, his resurrection, then the supernatural element, who is God, not a thing, but a who, not a what, but a who. God was involved as well in the authority of Jesus' words. And if he says, I've given you peace, affirm it tomorrow morning when you get up. I don't understand what's happening, God, but I affirm that peace. I will, in your grace, not let my heart be troubled, distressed, thrown into confusion, the Greek word means. I'm going to trust you for today. See, if in fact we truly believe the supernatural element of prophecy, then we are going to affirm the authority of Jesus in our lives. And by the way, I had another one, and be thankful I didn't go to it. But the reason I wanted to is because it was in 1 John. That's not Jesus' words. Yes, it is. If we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Don't make excuses for your sin. Choose to confess your sin before who he is. That's Jesus' words. It's not in red, but nonetheless, it's just as authoritative as the ones in red on that. See, How much do you believe in the supernatural element of prophecy in the life of Christ? 1 through 10. How much do you believe? Don't answer. No, don't answer. Show me by your life. Show me by your life. Show me by your life. Because of the fact, that's what God's. Doesn't matter whether you say 11. It doesn't even matter whether you say 1. Sometimes we can get into low dumps where we just feel it's a 1. God knows exactly what your heart is, and He will bring you through that. Can I encourage you? Be encouraged. There's ant-like, beetle-like strength in knowing the truth of prophecy. But there's also an accountability that comes with it that says, if I truly believe it, then I'm going to take seriously what it is that Jesus tells me. Are y'all going to, y'all, okay, are y'all going to tomorrow open the Word and allow whatever is said to you, even if you've read it 1,000 times before, nonetheless, I'm going to take it for today. It's my word, it's Christ's word, which is God's word to me. And I'm going to trust to that end.